I've attended plenty of military demonstrations in my career, but this one was different. Standing in the gleaming presentation hall of Earth Defense Corps headquarters, I could feel the condescension radiating from the alien delegation like heat from a barrel after a mag dump. Projectile weapons? The Kavari ambassador's translator crackled with what I swore was barely contained laughter. Surely this is a historical exhibition. I kept my face neutral, fingers resting on my modified M24 sniper rifle. The weapon was anything but historical. Tom had helped me tune it to perfection over the last 6 months. Speaking of Tom, I could see him fidgeting nervously at the back of the room, probably fighting the urge to launch into one of his technical lectures. "This is current issue," I said, keeping my voice level. "Standard equipment for our special operations teams." The ambassador's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, their species equivalent of rolling their eyes. Behind him, his military attachés chittered among themselves, their iridescent scales reflecting the overhead lights as they gestured at my rifle. Captain Morrison, the ambassador's translator, processed his clicks and whistles into English. "Your species is new to the galactic community. We understand certain technological gaps, but surely you don't expect to defend your world with primitive chemical propellants and metallic projectiles." I'd been warned this might happen. The Kavari were notorious tech snobs, having achieved space flight 2 centuries before we mastered flight within our atmosphere. Their energy weapons were works of art, I'll give them that. But art doesn't always win wars. "Perhaps a demonstration," I suggested, catching Tom's eye across the room. He straightened up immediately, already knowing where this was going. We'd practiced this dozens of times. The ambassador's head frills fluttered amusement, according to our xenologists. "You wish to demonstrate obsolete technology against modern defensive systems. Very well. It will be educational. For you." One of his military attachés stepped forward, activating his personal shield with a gesture. The air around him shimmed with a faint blue haze, standard Kavari defense technology. I'd studied it extensively. The shield could stop any energy weapon short of a capital ship's main gun. It dispersed heat, deflected plasma, and theoretically made the user invulnerable to primitive attacks. Theoretically. "If you could set up the targeting range, Tom," I called out. My partner quickly deployed the holographic targets, setting them up behind the shielded Kavari officer. "Sir," I addressed the attaché, "please stand still. This won't hurt you, but I need you to be a proper backstop." The alien's translator squawked something that might have been a laugh. The ambassador's frills rippled again. "Your projectile will never penetrate a Kavari battle shield, Captain. The kinetic dispersal alone." The crack of my rifle cut him off mid-sentence. The sound echoed through the presentation hall like a thunderclap, causing several of the aliens to flinch. Their species had sensitive hearing, something else I'd studied. Behind the attaché, the holographic target displayed a perfect center mass hit. The room went silent. The attaché stood frozen, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. Slowly, deliberately, I worked the bolt, ejecting the spent brass cartridge. It hit the floor with a small ping that seemed deafening in the silence. "Was operating perfectly," I finished for him. "Would you like to know why it failed?" Tom stepped forward, unable to contain himself any longer. I let him take the floor. He'd earned it after all the research we'd done together. "Your shield technology," he began, "operates on energy dispersal principles. It's designed to detect incoming energy signatures and create a counter-frequency. Brilliant engineering, really. But it has one fundamental flaw: it can't react to what it can't detect." I loaded another round, the mechanical action drawing every alien eye in the room. "A bullet fired from this rifle," I explained, "has no energy signature. It's just mass and velocity. No electronics, no energy field. Just good old-fashioned physics." The ambassador's frills had flattened against his head, a sign of distress or anger. I couldn't tell which. "But the kinetic dispersal field requires a microsecond to detect and react," Tom cut in. A .338 Lapua Magnum round travels at roughly 2,800 feet per second. Your shield's kinetic dispersal field takes approximately 3 microseconds to activate. Do the math. I watched understanding dawn in those alien eyes. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons and smart projectiles, things their civilization had been using for centuries. They'd evolved their defenses to counter increasingly complex attacks, never considering that something simpler might slip through. This is just one example, I continued, patting my rifle. We've got 2,000 years of weapons development in our archives. 2,000 years of finding new ways to throw one object at another really, really fast. Sure, we've got energy weapons now too, but we never stopped improving the old ways. The military attaché finally found his voice. One weakness can be corrected. This changes nothing. I smiled. You're right, one weakness isn't much. But tell me, how many other primitive solutions have you overlooked? How many basic principles of physics have you forgotten while chasing the next big technological breakthrough? The ambassador raised a hand, silencing his attaché. You've made your point, Captain Morrison, though I suspect you haven't shown us everything. No, sir, I agreed. Not even close. After the delegation left, Tom practically bounced over to me. Did you see their faces? When that round went straight through the shield? I thought the attaché was going to molt right there. I started breaking down my rifle, checking each component with practiced care. They'll be back. And next time, they won't be so dismissive. You think they'll try to steal our weapons data? I closed my rifle case with a sharp click. I know they will. That's why we only showed them the basics. Let them chase this rabbit while we prepare the real surprises. Tom's expression sobered. You really think it'll come to that? Looking out the presentation hall's windows at the setting sun, I nodded slowly. They just learned that humanity has weapons their defenses can't stop. Weapons that any decent machine shop can manufacture. Technology they can't easily control or regulate. I turned to meet his eyes. What do you think they'll do with that information? Well, he managed a grim smile, at least we've got more than rifles to show them. That we do, Tom, that we do. I checked my watch. Come on, we need to get to the range. If I'm right, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and not much time to do it. I could already feel it coming, the storm that would follow this demonstration. The Kavari wouldn't take this humiliation lying down, but that was fine by me. Let them come with their energy weapons and shield technology. We'd show them just how deadly primitive could be. The first shot shattered my apartment window at Zothrizizar. I was already moving before the glass hit the floor, muscle memory from years of combat training taking over. 2 more rounds cracked through the space where I'd been sleeping, their distinct whine telling me everything I needed to know. Kavari pulse rifles. Looks like the diplomatic approach was officially over. I grabbed my go bag and the M4 I keep by the bed. My phone buzzed, Tom's face lighting up the screen. They're here, he said before I could speak. 3 teams. They hit the weapons lab first. You safe? I chambered around, the sound deliberately loud enough for him to hear. Panic room at the facility. But Jack, they're not just stealing data. They're killing everyone who worked on the projectile weapons program. Of course they were. Can't have primitive humans running around with weapons that could pierce their precious shields. Stay put. I'm coming to you. Better hurry. Their tech can't breach the panic room's doors, but they're bringing in something big. I can hear them setting up in the main lab. The call ended as another burst of pulse fire lit up my bedroom. They were getting closer, trying to pin me down. Amateur move. They still hadn't learned that their energy weapons gave away their positions with every shot. I reached under my bed and pulled out an old friend, a Remington 870 shotgun. Nothing fancy about it. No electronics, no smart targeting, just steel and wood and 12-gauge simplicity. I'd loaded it with custom shells Tom and I had developed. Time to see if they worked as well in the field as they had on the range. The first Kavari breacher came through my door in a blur of iridescent scales and high-tech combat armor. Their latest gen battle shields sparkled like diamonds, probably upgraded after our demonstration last week. Too bad they still had the same fundamental flaw. The shotgun roared, and suddenly there was one less alien breacher to worry about. I was moving before the body hit the floor, heading for the window. 3 stories up, but I'd prepared for this. The drain pipe was rated for my weight, reinforced when I first moved in. Always have an exit strategy, first rule of survival. 2 more Kavari burst into the room, their pulse rifles tracking my movement. I didn't give them time to fire. The shotgun barked twice more, and then I was out the window, sliding down the pipe as energy bolts scorched the air around me. My boots hit pavement, and I was running, keeping to the shadows. The weapons research facility was 4 blocks away. In my ear, the emergency channel crackled to life. All EDIC personnel, this is command. We are under simultaneous attacks at multiple locations. Hostile forces confirmed as Kavari Special Operations Units. All personnel implement Protocol 7 immediately. Protocol 7. The aliens' done-up protocol, as Tom liked to call it. Every EDIC facility would be switching to purely mechanical defenses, now no electronics for them to hack, no energy shields for them to scan. Just good old-fashioned steel, concrete, and lead. I heard the whine of their hover vehicles approaching. They were trying to cut off the ground routes to the facility. Smart move, but they were thinking in 3 dimensions. Time to go old school. The manhole cover lifted easily, perks of knowing your escape routes in advance. The city's maintenance tunnels weren't on any modern maps, and their sensors wouldn't work well underground. Sometimes the best tech is no tech at all. The maintenance tunnels were pitch black, but I didn't need light. Counted my steps, just like training. Left at the 3rd junction, right at the pipe intersection, straight past the old subway connection. The Kavari would be watching every street above, never thinking to check these forgotten passages. My radio crackled. Tom's voice, barely a whisper. "Jack, they've started cutting through the panic room door. Some kind of plasma torch. Maybe 10 minutes left." "Almost there. How many outside the door?" "At least 6. They've got something big with them, like a mobile weapons platform." "Perfect." They were clustering their forces, probably feeling safe behind their upgraded shields. Time to introduce them to another primitive concept, the kill zone. The access panel to the facility's sublevel opened silently, another modification we'd made for just this scenario. I could hear them above, the harsh clicking of their combat language echoing through the ventilation shafts. The weapons lab was our pride and joy, filled with prototypes and designs that merged old-world reliability with new-world innovations. But right now, I was more interested in what we'd hidden under the floor panels. "Tom," I whispered into my radio, "remember that Civil War discussion we had? About how they dealt with armored ships?" A pause. Then, "You didn't." "Oh, I did. You know me, always appreciate the classics. Now, when I give the signal, I need you to make some noise. Bang on the door, shout, whatever. Just keep their attention forward." The Kavari had positioned themselves in a semicircle around the panic room door, their weapon platform humming as it powered up. Through the grating, I could see their feet right where I needed them. Time for a history lesson. I pulled the lever we'd installed months ago, and 200 pounds of black powder, actual, honest-to-God Civil War-era black powder, detonated beneath the floor. The explosion wasn't particularly high-tech. Didn't need to be. The blast wave caught their entire team from below, turning their perfect formation into chaos. Their shields, designed to stop high-energy weapons, did nothing against the simple kinetic force and shrapnel. I was moving before the echo died, up through the maintenance hatch and into the smoke-filled lab. The Kavari were scattered, shields flickering as they tried to compensate for damage they were never designed to handle. The M4 barked, each round finding its mark. Modern combat rifles might not be as powerful as their energy weapons, but you don't need much power when you're aiming for weak points. 3 down before they could regroup. Their weapon platform turned toward me, its energy cannon powering up. I dropped and rolled as it fired, the beam turning several $1 million worth of lab equipment into slag. But the platform had a fatal flaw: it was powered by their standard energy cells. The same cells that didn't react well to sudden temperature changes. I pulled out my last surprise, a simple thermate grenade, another primitive weapon they'd probably dismissed as obsolete. The throw was perfect, landing right in the platform's power housing. The resulting explosion would have made Tom proud if he hadn't been cursing about the damage to his lab. The panic room door opened, revealing my partner, clutching one of his prototype rifles. He surveyed the destruction, then looked at me. Black powder? Really? Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, I said, checking the fallen Kavari for intel. Besides, you're the one who suggested studying naval warfare tactics. As a theoretical exercise, he kicked a piece of debris. Do you know how long it's going to take to rebuild this lab? Less time than it would take to rebuild Earth if they'd gotten their hands on our weapons data. I found what I was looking for: a tactical pad with Kavari military markings. Besides, this isn't over. That was just their first attempt. Tom sighed, already pulling out his tablet to assess the damage. They'll adapt their shields after this. Try to counter black powder explosions. Let them. I grinned, checking my ammunition. By the time they figure out how to stop black powder, we'll have something else ready. Something even more primitive. More primitive than Civil War explosives. Tom, my friend, wait until you hear about Greek fire. The first sign that something was wrong came when our coffee makers stopped working. All of them, simultaneously. In a facility full of sleep-deprived weapons researchers, this was normally cause for revolt. Today, it probably saved our lives. I was in the main testing range with Tom, running diagnostics on a modified Barrett M82 when the power hiccup hit. The lights flickered, steadied, then died completely. Emergency power kicked in for exactly 3 seconds before it too went dark. That's not good, Tom muttered, his fingers flying over his tablet. Main power grid is down, backup generators aren't responding, and I'm losing connection to everything. I was already moving, muscle memory taking over as I assembled the Barrett in the dark. How many people in the facility right now? Skeleton crew. Maybe 30? It's 0400, so just night shift, and... Tom's voice trailed off as his tablet screen went black. And now I'm officially blind. The testing range had no windows, but I didn't need light to know what was happening. The Kavari had learned from their last assault. No more small teams with energy weapons. This was something bigger. Get to the armory, I ordered, slinging the Barrett over my shoulder and grabbing my ever-present M4. And Tom, don't touch anything electronic, not even a light switch. You think they've weaponized their EMP technology. I think they've figured out how to turn our reliance on electronics against us. The emergency exit door needed electronic authorization to open. I pulled out my combat knife and pried off the control panel, finding the manual release cable exactly where it should be. Good thing we planned for this. The door opened with a satisfying mechanical clunk. The hallway beyond was dark, but my eyes had already adjusted. More importantly, my ears were picking up subtle sounds from above: the faint whine of Kavari drop ships, the thud of magnetic grapples on the roof. They're doing a top-down assault, I whispered, leading Tom toward the armory. Probably figured out about the tunnels after last time. How many? From the engine sounds, at least 6 ships. Figure 20 troops per ship, standard Kavari assault configuration. I paused at an intersection, listening. They'll breach through the roof access points, establish control of the upper floors, then work their way down. Tom's breathing was steady. He'd come a long way from the nervous tech expert I'd met a year ago. They'll be expecting us to be blind and helpless without power. Exactly, I smiled in the darkness. Time to show them what happens when humans have to do things the hard way. We reached the armory door, another electronic lock, another manual override. Inside, most of the modern weapons were dead. their electronic components fried by whatever the Kavari were using. But that didn't matter. We prepared for this. Remember that storage room you said I was wasting space with? I moved to the back wall, pulling away a false panel. Time to break out the museum pieces. The museum was my personal collection, carefully maintained and modified. Bolt-action rifles, pump shotguns, revolvers, weapons that needed nothing more than mechanical action and human skill to operate. No electronics, no power requirements, just precision-engineered steel and wood. "Take the Winchester," I told Tom, handing him the modified lever-action rifle. "It's loaded with those sabot rounds you designed, perfect for punching through their new armor." Above us, the first breaching charges detonated. The Kavari were in, and they'd be moving fast. Their night vision technology was superior to ours, but they relied on it completely. Time to use that against them. "What's the play?" Tom asked, checking the Winchester with practiced ease. Another change from the lab technician he handled weapons like a natural now. "They'll expect us to either surrender or make a break for it." I distributed ammunition between us, all hand-loaded rounds we'd specifically designed for this scenario. "Instead, we're going to show them why humans started fighting in the dark long before electricity was invented." The first Kavari team breached the third floor with military precision. Their combat armor gleamed with active sensor arrays, shield generators humming with enough power to stop any modern weapon. They moved like ghosts through the darkened hallways, their enhanced vision systems painting the world in crystal-clear detail. Which was exactly what I was counting on. "Now," I whispered into my radio, an old Vietnam-era survival radio that operated on such primitive frequencies the Kavari EMP hadn't even noticed it. Tom, positioned 3 corridors away, struck the first match. The magnesium flare he'd modified erupted into brilliant, searing light. The Kavari's sensitive vision systems, calibrated for darkness, overloaded instantly. Their screens, a high-pitched clicking that their translators couldn't process, echoed through the facility. I was already moving, the M1903 Springfield in my hands. The rifle was older than my grandfather, but the .306 rounds it fired didn't care about age. The first shot caught a blinded Kavari soldier in the chest, the specialized round bypassing his shield completely. The bolt action was smooth, practiced, another round chambered before the first brass hit the floor. Contact on level 3. The Kavari command channel squawked through our captured communicator. Human resistance using primitive lighting devices and projectile weapons. Adjust vision systems. "Too late," I muttered, dropping 2 more aliens as they stumbled in the afterglow of the flare. Their vision systems would take precious minutes to recalibrate, minutes they didn't have. Tom's Winchester spoke from his position, the distinctive lever action followed by the thud of Kavari troops hitting the floor. He positioned himself at the end of a long corridor, a perfect firing lane. The aliens' advanced combat doctrine hadn't prepared them for something as basic as defending against enfilade fire. Second team moving to level 2. The Kavari commander sounded rattled now. "All units switched to thermal imaging." I keyed my radio. "Tom, Phase 2. On it." I could hear the grin in his voice. Time to make it hot. The sprinkler system was dead, killed by the EMP. But water pipes still worked on simple pressure. Tom had spent weeks modifying specific sections, adding manual release valves. Now he opened them all, flooding entire sections of the facility with cold water. The thermal imaging systems the Kavari switched to showed them a facility full of temperature variations, water droplets creating a fog of heat signatures that their advanced sensors couldn't penetrate. More importantly, the water was seeping into their electronic equipment. "Warning: shield generators malfunctioning. Water damage to primary systems." I switched to the shotgun, an old Ithaca Model 37, pump action, no electronics to fail. The sound of me racking a shell echoed through the wet corridors. Psychological warfare was another primitive concept the Kavari had forgotten about. Third team, breach level 1. Find their command center. "Jack," Tom's voice crackled over the radio, They're heading for the main lab. Good. I moved through the darkness, years of training guiding my steps. Get to position Alpha. Time for the history lesson. The main weapons lab was our pride and joy, filled with prototypes and designs that had taken months to perfect. The Kavari would expect us to defend it at all costs. Instead, we turned it into a trap. I could hear them stacking up outside the lab doors, their combat armor whirring as they prepared for breach. Their sensors would be showing them heat signatures inside carefully placed heating elements Tom had installed months ago. The breach was textbook perfect. They hit all 3 doors simultaneously, rolling in with practice precision. Their weapons tracked the heat signatures, energy bolts turning empty lab coats into plasma. That's when Tom triggered the tripwires. Simple piano wire, connected to even simpler mechanical triggers. The kind of booby traps soldiers had been using since the dawn of warfare. The lab erupted in a cascade of flashbangs and smoke grenades, not modern ones with electronic timers, but old-fashioned mechanical fuses. The chaos in the lab was beautiful. Kavari troops stumbling blind, their sophisticated combat systems overwhelmed by the most basic of military tactics. Through the smoke, I could see their shield generators sparking, compromised by the water, and overloaded by trying to compensate for multiple types of attacks. All units, fall back. The Kavari commander's voice had lost its professional edge. This facility is compromised. We need... The transmission cut off as Tom triggered the final surprise, a modified Civil War-era percussion cap system that detonated several pounds of black powder in the ventilation shafts. The blast wasn't designed to kill. Instead, it filled every corridor with a thick cloud of smoke and carbon particles. Their filters won't handle this, Tom's voice crackled over the radio. That powder's mixed with iron filings. It'll play hell with their electronic systems. He was right. Through my scope, I could see Kavari soldiers tearing off their helmets, their breathing apparatus clogged with particulates it was never designed to handle. Their combat doctrine relied heavily on integrated systems. Take those away, and they were lost. Warning: multiple system failures, unable to establish tactical uplink. I moved through the smoke like a ghost, the old Springfield finding targets with mechanical precision. No electronic assist, no smart targeting, just iron sights and years of practice. Each shot dropped another alien warrior, their advanced armor useless against simple physics. "Jack," Tom called out. "They're pulling back to the roof, trying to reach their ships." "Not yet." I keyed the radio to our backup frequency. "All IDIC personnel, execute Protocol Echo 7. Throughout the facility, the remaining staff, those we'd carefully selected and trained for exactly this scenario, sprang into action. Simple rope snares, manually operated steel shutters, and mechanical barricades deployed across escape routes. Technology so basic it was practically Stone Age, but devastating against an enemy that had forgotten such things existed. This is impossible. The Kavari command channel was chaos now. How are they fighting without power, without targeting systems? I reached my final position, overlooking the main atrium. The remaining Kavari forces had clustered there, trying to establish a defensive position. Their armor was sparking, shields flickering as the iron-laced smoke worked its way into their systems. "Ready for the finale?" I asked Tom. "Mechanical winches are set, just like you planned." He paused. "You know, when you first suggested studying medieval warfare techniques, I thought you were crazy. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." I lined up my shot carefully. "Besides, what's that saying about those who don't study history?" The Springfield's report echoed through the atrium. My round struck the exact spot we'd calculated, severing the main support cable Tom had carefully weakened over the past month. The heavy steel security gate, normally powered by electric motors, dropped under its own weight. The Kavari never saw it coming. Their sensors, designed to detect energy weapons and explosive devices, didn't register the simple threat of gravity and mass. The gate slammed down with devastating force, cutting off their escape route and splitting their forces. "All units, this is Commander Vextel. Emergency evacuation. Get to the ships. About those ships, Tom's voice held a note of satisfaction. Remember how we spent weeks studying old nautical defense systems? Above us, the sounds of chaos erupted as the Kavari discovered their ship's landing gear had been entangled in simple steel cables, a trick naval forces had used to disable ships for centuries. This facility is lost. The Kavari commander's final transmission was frantic. They're not fighting like a modern military. We can't predict their tactics. That's the point, I muttered, picking off stragglers as the alien forces retreated in disarray. You forgot that humans spent thousands of years fighting without computers. Without power. We remember what works when everything else fails. The battle was over 30 minutes later. The facility was a mess of smoke, water, and disabled alien technology. But we'd held. More importantly, we'd sent a message. Tom found me in the armory, carefully cleaning the old Springfield. Think they learned their lesson this time? I checked the rifle's action, feeling the smooth mechanical precision. They learned that we can fight without power, that we remember the old ways. I slid a fresh round into the chamber. But they haven't learned the most important lesson yet. Which is that these weren't even our best tricks, just the ones we were willing to show them. The facility's backup generators finally kicked in, emergency lights casting long shadows through the smoke-filled corridors. Above us, EDC recovery teams were already moving in, securing the site and collecting alien technology for study. Get some rest, I told Tom. Tomorrow, we start preparing for their next attack, and this time, I patted the old rifle, we'll show them some really primitive warfare. You want us to defend Earth from an alien invasion, using a Civil War fort? General Harrison's face was a study in skepticism as he stared at the holographic display. Morrison, I know you've had success with unconventional tactics, but this is pushing it. I stood my ground, pointing to the ancient fortification perched on the mountainside. Fort McKenzie hadn't seen active military service in over 150 years, but its walls still stood proud against the Montana sky. More importantly, it commanded the only viable approach to one of Earth's most crucial defense installations. Sir, the Kavari will expect us to defend the quantum communications array with modern fortifications. Electronic countermeasures, energy shields, automated defense systems. I highlighted the fort's strategic position. They won't expect us to fall back on 19th century military architecture. Tom stepped forward, his tablet displaying the modifications we'd proposed. The fort's basic design is actually perfect for our needs. 3-meter thick stone walls, multiple firing positions, and a natural spring for water supply. But more importantly, he pulled up a cross-section of the walls. It's completely imp-proof, no electronics to fail. The general rubbed his temples. And the original cannon emplacements? Still functional, I said, unable to hide my satisfaction. We've spent the last month restoring them. 32 powder guns, ranging from 12-pounders to 8-inch columbiads. All mechanical, all operational. You can't seriously expect Civil War artillery to be effective against modern alien ships. Tom's grin widened. Actually, sir, that's exactly what we expect. The Kavari's shield technology has a fundamental flaw we've exploited before it can't react quickly enough to simple kinetic impacts. Their ships use the same basic shield design. I pulled up footage from our test firing. More importantly, black powder weapons have a unique signature. The Kavari's sensors are calibrated to detect modern propellants and energy weapons. They literally can't see these coming. Harrison watched the footage of a restored Columbiad turning a derelict alien shuttle into scrap metal. I assume you've made some modifications to the ammunition? Yes, sir. Tom highlighted the shell designs. We've maintained the basic black powder propellant, but the projectiles are now tungsten cored with a depleted uranium penetrator. Old school meets new school. The general was silent for a long moment, studying the plans. Outside his office window, The evening sky was clear enough to see the Kavari fleet in high orbit, dozens of ships, waiting for the right moment to strike. "How many men do you need?" 200, I replied immediately. "All trained in mechanical weapons operation. No modern combat implants, no enhanced gear, just basic equipment and the skills to use it. You realize if this fails, we'll lose our primary communication link with the lunar defense bases." I met his gaze steadily. "Sir, with respect, if we try to defend that array with conventional modern forces, we'll lose it anyway. The Kavari have adapted to our current technology. They haven't adapted to our history." Harrison sighed, then nodded. "You have 48 hours to get your forces in position. The latest intelligence suggests they're planning a major push soon." "That's all we need." I gathered the holographic projector. "One more thing, sir. We'll need every black powder charge we can get our hands on. And I mean every single one, from military stockpiles to historical reenactment groups." "Why so much powder?" Tom and I exchanged glances. "Because, sir," I said carefully, "we're not just planning to defend that fort. We're planning to remind the Kavari why Earth's armies were feared long before we had electricity." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Fort Mackenzie came alive with a strange mix of historical accuracy and modern innovation. Teams of soldiers, stripped of their usual high-tech gear, learned to operate restored artillery pieces. The sound of black powder charges echoed off the mountain walls as we ran drill after drill. Tom had outdone himself with the ammunition modifications. "Each shell is a work of art," he explained, showing me a cross-section. "The black powder charge gives us that signature masking effect we need, but the projectile itself is pure 21st century. Tungsten uranium penetrator, wrapped in a specially designed sabot that peels away after leaving the barrel." I watched as another crew practiced loading their 12-pounder. Their movements were becoming smoother, more coordinated. "Loading time?" "Down to 20 seconds, Tom replied proudly. Not quite as fast as the original Civil War crews, but they had years of practice. We've had 2 days. The fort itself was a masterpiece of 19th century military engineering. 3 tiers of artillery positions, each with interlocking fields of fire. The walls, built from local granite, were actually stronger now than when they were first constructed, thanks to a century and a half of mineral deposits filling every crack and crevice. "Powder magazine is fully stocked," reported Sergeant Chen, approaching with a clipboard paper, not digital. 20 tons of black powder, plus another 5 tons of modern propellant for the modified shells. All stored in the original underground vaults. I nodded, checking off another item on our preparation list. "Water reserves?" "Springs flowing at full capacity. We've got enough stored to last a month, plus the natural source." The sun was setting behind the mountains when our lookout spotted the first sign of trouble. A single Kavari scout ship, running dark, making a high-altitude pass over the quantum array facility. "They're mapping our defenses," Tom observed, watching through a traditional spotting scope. "Or trying to, at least." I smiled grimly. "What are they seeing?" "Nothing but an old stone fort. We've kept all power signatures to absolute minimum, just like you ordered. No electronic emissions, no shield generators, not even basic comm equipment. As far as their sensors are concerned, this place is abandoned." That was the beauty of our plan. The Kavari relied so heavily on detecting energy signatures and electronic systems that they'd become blind to anything else. They'd be looking for shield generators, weapon emplacements, communication arrays. Instead, all their scans would show was an ancient stone structure. "Time to go dark," I ordered as the scout ship disappeared behind the mountains. "No lights, no power sources. Everything mechanical from here on out." Throughout the fort, soldiers settled into their positions. Modern LED flashlights were replaced with old-fashioned oil lanterns, carefully shielded to prevent any light from showing outside. Communication would be by runner or signal flag, old methods that had served armies for millennia. In the main powder magazine, Tom was making final adjustments to his pride and joy, a mechanical computer system based on World War II artillery tables. No electronics, he explained to the gun crews. Just precision machined gears and springs. Input the target speed and bearing here, altitude here, and it'll give you the elevation and powder charge needed. Like a really old-school fire control computer, one of the gunners observed. Exactly. The Kavari won't be expecting anything this primitive. I made my way to the highest observation post, where Lieutenant Rivera was setting up an array of astronomical telescopes, the old-fashioned kind, with glass lenses and no electronic components. We'll see them coming, she assured me. They may have stealth technology, but they can't hide from basic optics. Their ships still block starlight. The attack began just before dawn. Our telescope observers spotted them first, a dozen Kavari warships descending through the atmosphere in perfect formation. Their stealth systems might hide them from modern radar, but they couldn't hide the way they blocked out the stars. Here we go, I muttered, watching through my spotter's scope. Tom, are the guns ready? All batteries report ready, he confirmed, his voice tight with anticipation. Mechanical computers are calibrated. Each gun crew has their firing solutions pre-calculated for different approach vectors. The Kavari ships moved with absolute confidence, clearly expecting to encounter modern defenses. Their sensors would be searching for power signatures, shield generators, electronic emissions. They found nothing. Hold, I ordered as the ships entered the valley. Let them get closer. Through the scope, I could see their formation spreading out. Standard Kavari assault pattern. They'd learned not to cluster too tightly after our previous encounters, but they were still flying exactly where we wanted them. They're scanning the fort, Tom reported, watching their energy signatures through a modified theodolite. Probably confused as hell about why we're defending this position with a stone building. I waited until the lead ship was perfectly positioned. Signal the batteries. Fire as planned. The first volley was something out of a history book. 32 Civil War-era cannon, their barrels elevated to precise angles, roared simultaneously. The sound was devastating, echoing off the mountain walls like thunder. Black powder smoke billowed from the embrasures, temporarily obscuring our view. But we didn't need to see to know we'd hit our targets. The Kavari ship's shields were calibrated to stop energy weapons and modern projectiles. They weren't designed to handle solid shot moving at relatively slow velocities. Our modified shells, pushed by simple black powder charges, slipped right through their defenses. The lead ship's port side crumpled under multiple impacts. 2 more ships took direct hits, their shields flickering uselessly as tungsten uranium penetrators punched through their hulls. Reload! The cry echoed across all 3 tiers of the fort. Gun crews worked with practiced precision, ramming home fresh charges and shells. The Kavari recovered quickly, but their response showed their confusion. Energy weapons blazed, targeting the fort's walls. But the ancient granite, 3 meters thick and reinforced by time, absorbed the hits with minimal damage. Second volley. On my mark, I watched as the alien ships regrouped, trying to gain altitude. Fire. Another thunderous barrage. More hits. The Kavari shields, designed to handle single powerful impacts, couldn't adapt to multiple slower projectiles hitting simultaneously. Basic physics, applied with devastating effect. They're trying to jam us, Tom called out, a note of amusement in his voice. Electronic warfare suites at full power. I had to laugh. They were fighting the last war, trying to disable systems we weren't even using. Meanwhile, our gun crews continued their work, mechanical computers clicking as they adjusted their firing solutions. The battle lasted 20 minutes. 6 Kavari ships crashed in the valley below, their hulls torn open by 19th century artillery firing 21st century ammunition. 3 more limped away, trailing atmosphere. The remaining ships retreated to high orbit, leaving us in control of the valley. As the powder smoke cleared, I made my way down to the main battery. Gun crews were already cleaning their pieces, preparing for the next attack. The fort's walls, blackened by enemy fire, but largely intact, had proved their worth once again. Tom met me by the powder magazine, his face streaked with black powder residue. "You know they'll be back," he said, checking his mechanical calculator for damage, "with bigger ships and stronger shields." "Let them come," I replied, running my hand along the cool granite wall. "We've got plenty more history lessons to teach them." In the distance, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The quantum array, our vital link to Earth's lunar defenses, remained secure, and in orbit, I knew the Kavari commanders were facing an uncomfortable realization. Sometimes the old ways were the deadliest. "Start distributing more powder," I ordered. "And Tom? Those modifications you mentioned for the 8-inch Columbiads? Let's implement them all. Something tells me we're going to need every trick from the history books before this is over." The global EMP hit at exactly 3000 Greenwich Mean Time. One moment, humanity's technological civilization hummed along as usual. The next, everything with a microchip went dark. Everything. I was cleaning my grandfather's old M1 Garand when it happened. The lights died, my phone went dead, and in the distance, I could hear the sounds of vehicles suddenly stalling. Through my apartment window, I watched as the city grid failed in sections, block by block, until only darkness remained. The Kavari had finally played their trump card. My landline phone rang an ancient rotary model I'd installed for exactly this scenario. Tom's voice came through, breathless but clear. "Jack, please tell me you're seeing this." "I'm seeing it. They finally figured out how to take down our power grid." I continued cleaning the rifle by candlelight, the familiar motions calming. "How bad is it?" "Global. Every integrated circuit on Earth just got fried. Modern military equipment, civilian infrastructure, communications, it's all gone." He paused. Except for anything too primitive to be affected," I finished. "Where are you?" "The backup facility? You know, the one you insisted we build with 1950s technology? Turns out you were right. Again." I had to smile at that. After our success at Fort McKenzie, the EAT had finally started taking my primitive warfare theories seriously. We'd spent months setting up facilities equipped with vacuum tube electronics and mechanical computers technology so old it was effectively EMP-proof. What's our status? Most of our modern forces are completely blind. Smart weapons, targeting systems, communications all dead. But the old stuff, the really old stuff, working perfectly. Tom's voice took on an excited edge. "Remember that warehouse of surplus weapons you made a stockpile? The one everyone called Morrison's Museum? Yeah, I remember. Well, it's about to become the most important arsenal on Earth. How fast can you get here?" I was already moving, pulling on my combat gear. No tactical vest with electronic systems, just old-school webbing and pouches. 30 minutes. Less if the roads are clear, which they should be, since every car built after 1980 is probably dead. Bring everything you've got. The old stuff. The really old stuff. Already packed. I grabbed my go bag carefully prepared with nothing but mechanical weapons and basic supplies. What about the Kavari? Our backup radar is tracking multiple ships entering the atmosphere. Old vacuum tube system, like the kind used in World War II. They're coming in fast, probably thinking we're completely blind. I slung the Garand over my shoulder, adding a lever-action Winchester and my trusty 1911 to my loadout. They're about to learn that humans fought wars long before we had computers. "That's not all," Tom added. "You know how you always said we relied too much on modern communications? Well, guess what's still working perfectly? Don't tell me." "Yep, Morse code. Ham radio operators around the world are already linking up. We're getting reports from everywhere. And Jack, you're going to love this. Remember all those military history enthusiasts everyone used to laugh at?" I stepped out into the darkened city, the stars visible for the first time in years without light pollution. The reenactors. They're mobilizing. Thousands of people with working Civil War-era weapons and equipment. People who know how to fight without electronics. how to communicate without phones, how to navigate without GPS. A smile spread across my face as I started walking. Modern warfare had just been reset by about 100 years, and we were probably the only people who were ready for it. Tom, get on that old radio network. Spread the word. Operation Throwback is now in effect. Tell everyone with mechanical weapons to prepare for combat. And Tom? Yeah. Dust off those old signal flags. Something tells me we're about to teach the Kavari why humanity's primitive weapons are still around after all these centuries. The city was a different world in the darkness. No street lights, no glowing screens, no hum of electronics. Just the stars above and the sound of people trying to understand why their world had suddenly gone dark. I moved quickly, staying in the shadows, the weight of my mechanical weapons reassuring against my back. The first Kavari scout ship appeared as I was halfway to the facility. It glided silently overhead, its advanced sensors no doubt scanning for any sign of resistance. They wouldn't find much, at least, nothing their modern systems could detect. My radio crackled an old Vietnam-era PRC-25, its vacuum tubes immune to the EMP. "Jack, you seeing this?" Tom's voice was distorted but clear. "I see it. They're doing recon, probably thinking we're blind and deaf." I ducked into a doorway as the ship passed overhead. "What's our status?" "You're going to love this. Remember Captain Rodriguez, the one who collected World War II equipment? The guy everyone called the historian? Yeah, what about him? He's got 3 M45 quad-mount guns operational. You know, the ones they used in World War II? Hand-cranked, mechanical computing sights." I grinned in the darkness. "Let me guess, the Kavari shields don't register them as weapons." "Better than that. The old .50 Zerkal rounds are so primitive their sensors don't even pick them up." First scout ship that got close to his position. Tom made an explosive sound effect. "How many more surprises like that do we have?" "You wouldn't believe it. Every military history museum in the country is suddenly a working arsenal. We've got everything from Civil War cannon to World War II artillery coming online. All mechanical, all operational." I paused at an intersection, watching another scout ship pass. "What about the main Kavari force?" "Large formation approaching from the north. They think they've won, that we're helpless without our technology. Their communications are wide open, not even bothering to encrypt anymore." "How do you know that?" "Because," Tom's voice held a note of triumph, "we've got a network of ham radio operators intercepting everything. The Kavari didn't even consider that we'd have working radio equipment. They thought the EMP would blind us completely." I reached the facility, an old concrete bunker that looked abandoned from the outside. The guard at the door was carrying an M1903 Springfield, complete with bayonet. No electronic security systems here, just steel doors and mechanical locks. Inside, the scene was like stepping back in time. The command center was lit by old-fashioned bulbs powered by diesel generators. Vacuum tube radios crackled with Morse code messages. A massive mechanical plotting board showed the positions of known Kavari ships, updated by hand as reports came in. Tom met me at the entrance, his face lit by the warm glow of incandescent bulbs. "Welcome to the past," he said with a grin. "Or, as I like to call it, the future of warfare." "Status report?" He led me to the plotting board. "Kavari forces are concentrating here, here, and here." He pointed to different markers. "They're targeting what they think are our command and control centers, modern military bases, communication hubs, power plants. While our actual command and control is running on technology they consider too primitive to be a threat." Tom's grin widened. "But that's not the best part. Show him, Sarah." A young lieutenant stepped forward, her hands covered in pencil marks from updating the plotting board. "Sir, we've been monitoring their communications. They're completely baffled. Their sensors show our civilization has gone dark, but they keep taking losses. They can't understand how we're still fighting." I studied the plotting board, watching as another marker was updated, another Kavari scout ship down. this time to what the notation indicated was a restored 90mm anti-aircraft gun from the Korean War era. The aliens' confusion was becoming our greatest weapon. "How many operational units do we have?" I asked, noting the clusters of green pins representing our forces. Tom consulted a leather-bound logbook, no computers needed. "It's actually growing by the hour. Every time we get another ham radio operator online, we discover more groups with working mechanical weapons. Civil War artillery batteries, World War II coastal defense guns, even old steam-powered machinery that's being repurposed." "Show me the Kavari formation again." The lieutenant adjusted the markers, revealing the alien fleet's pattern. They were moving with the confidence of a force that believed its enemy was blind and helpless. Their ships were spread out, not bothering with defensive formations. "Perfect," I muttered. "They have no idea what they're flying into." "Tom, what's the status of Operation Throwback?" He pulled out a map marked with colored pencils, no digital displays needed. "Better than we hoped. Those old military history networks you insisted we maintain? They're paying off big time. We've got confirmed groups in every major region, all with working mechanical weapons and basic radio communication." "Sir," a radio operator called out from his station, the vacuum tubes of his set glowing warmly. "Message from Group 7. They've modified a set of World War I French 75mm field guns, ready to engage on your order." Another operator chimed in. "Group 12 reports their steam-powered manufacturing facility is operational. They're producing black powder and basic ammunition using 19th century methods." I couldn't help but smile. The Kavari had tried to send us back to the past, not realizing we'd been preparing for exactly that scenario. Their EMP attack, meant to blind and paralyze us, had instead stripped away the technological clutter and revealed the bedrock of human military capability. "What's the status of the primary Kavari force?" I asked, moving to the plotting board. "Entering Grid Sector 4, the lieutenant reported, updating the markers. "They're following our major highways, probably using them as visual references since they knocked out their own nav systems with the EMP." "Predictable," I noted. "They still think like a modern military force." "Tom, remember what we discussed about Civil War-era ambush tactics?" His eyes lit up. "The hidden battery positions, already ahead of you. We've got restored field guns positioned along every major approach route. All mechanical sites, all manual operation." "Sir?" another radio operator called out. "Multiple groups reporting ready. They're asking for the signal." I looked at the plotting board one last time. The Kavari fleet, represented by red markers, was moving directly into our trap. Their sensors would be showing them a dead civilization, while all around them, gunners were quietly elevating their pieces. Mechanically operated rangefinders were being adjusted, and ammunition was being loaded. "Send the signal," I ordered. 3 long clicks, too short. Just like we practiced. The radio operator's hand moved to his key, tapping out the pattern that would coordinate our forces across the entire region. In bunkers, hidden positions, and hastily fortified strong points, men and women who had spent years practicing with obsolete weapons received the message. "Now," I said quietly, "let's show them why these weapons have survived for centuries." The night erupted with thunder as hundreds of primitive weapons opened fire simultaneously. The Kavari never knew what hit them. Their sensors, designed to detect energy weapons and modern explosives, were blind to simple chemical propellants and kinetic projectiles. "First reports coming in," Tom announced, reading from messages as they arrived. "Multiple hits confirmed. Kavari shields ineffective against mechanical artillery. They're breaking formation." I watched as the red markers on the plotting board began to scatter. The aliens' careful formation dissolved into chaos as they discovered that humanity's past was very much alive and still deadly. "Send the secondary signal," I ordered. "Tell all groups to maintain fire." "The Kavari wanted to send us back in time?" I picked up my Garand, checking the action. "Let's show them exactly what that means." They're calling them the Perfectos, Tom said, laying out the grainy photographs on our makeshift command table. Completely autonomous combat units. No pilots, no remote control, just pure artificial intelligence. I studied the images, captured by one of our surviving mechanical cameras. The Kavari's new weapons looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a tank, their metallic bodies gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. Each one stood about 3 meters tall, armed with what appeared to be multiple energy weapon systems. "How many?" I asked, noting the distinctive tracks they left in the mud. Initial estimates suggest around 5,000 units deployed globally. They're completely independent of central control, a direct response to our disruption of their command and control systems. Lieutenant Sarah Parker, our tactical analyst, spread out a map marked with recent combat reports. "They're learning, sir. These units don't rely on complex electronic warfare or shield systems. Pure mechanical efficiency combined with advanced AI. And..." She hesitated. "And what?" "We can't hack them. There's no wireless communication, no network to exploit. Each unit operates independently, making tactical decisions based on its own observations." I picked up one of the photos, examining the machine's weapon systems. "What about their combat performance?" Tom's expression was grim. "Nearly perfect. They don't miss, don't get tired, don't need resupply. Traditional guerrilla tactics aren't working. They can predict standard human combat patterns with 99.9% accuracy." "Sir," a radio operator called out. "Message from Sector 7. The Perfectos just wiped out an entire company of our mechanized units. No survivors." I watched as Sarah marked another red X on the map. Too many red X's lately. The Kavari had finally developed something our primitive weapons weren't easily countering. "What about vulnerabilities?" I asked, moving to the weapons rack where my trusted rifles hung. "Everything has a weakness." "That's just it," Tom said, following me. "They seem to have counters for everything we've thrown at them. Energy weapons bounce off their armor. Modern explosives get detected and avoided. Even our old reliable kinetic weapons aren't as effective. Their armor is specifically designed to deflect ballistic impacts." I ran my hand along the wooden stock of my M1903 Springfield, feeling the worn smoothness of the wood. "You said they predict standard human combat patterns. What about non-standard patterns?" Tom's eyes lit up slightly. "What are you thinking?" "These eyes, they're learning machine, right? They build their tactical responses based on observed human behavior patterns." "Yes, they've apparently been studying human military tactics for months, building a comprehensive combat model." I picked up the Springfield, checking its action with practiced ease. The mechanical simplicity of the bolt mechanism was reassuring compared to the complexity of our enemy. "Tom, what's the one thing eyes can never truly replicate?" He thought for a moment. "Human unpredictability." "Close. Human irrationality." I grabbed my ammunition pouch. "These machines are built on logic, on patterns, on what makes sense. But humans? We've won battles throughout history by doing things that make absolutely no sense." Sarah looked up from her map. "Sir, are you suggesting we fight illogically?" "I'm suggesting we fight like humans. Real humans, not the predictable patterns these eyes have studied." I turned to Tom. "Get me every unorthodox combat tactic in the historical record. Everything that shouldn't have worked but did. Every crazy, irrational strategy that succeeded despite all logic." "You want to confuse their combat algorithms," Tom said slowly, realization dawning. "No," I corrected him, checking my ammunition load. "I want to break them. An AI can adapt to confusion. But true irrationality? That's something no logical system can handle." 3 days later, I lay prone in the mud, watching through my rifle's iron sights as a pair of Perfectos methodically swept through the ruins of what had once been downtown Seattle. Their movements were precise, calculated, perfect, and that would be their downfall. "All units in position?" I whispered into my mechanical field telephone, Another piece of technology too primitive for the Kavari to bother monitoring. "Ready?" Tom's voice came back, barely audible. "Though I still think this is insane." "That's the point." I watched as the Perfecto units moved exactly as we predicted they would. Their tactical algorithms were flawless, which made them perfectly predictable. Begin Operation Madness. The first phase started with Sergeant Miller's team. They burst from their hiding spots, charging directly at the Perfectos while singing "Scotland the Brave" at the top of their lungs. Some were carrying shields made from old car doors, others wielding sledgehammers alongside their rifles. The AI units froze for exactly 1.3 seconds, an eternity in combat terms. Their combat algorithms, trained on centuries of logical military doctrine, simply couldn't process the sight of humans deliberately charging superior forces while singing and carrying improvised medieval weapons. That brief hesitation was all we needed. The real attack came from below. We'd spent 2 days studying old Vietnam War tunnel warfare manuals, combined with medieval siege techniques. Teams of soldiers erupted from hidden holes in the ground, throwing weighted nets over the Perfecto's legs, while others jammed wooden wedges into their joints. "Second phase," I barked into the phone. Tom's voice crackled back. "You're still crazy." But he gave the signal anyway. From the surrounding buildings, dozens of people emerged, not soldiers, but civilian historical reenactors we'd recruited. They were dressed in everything from Revolutionary War uniforms to medieval armor, creating a chaotic visual pattern that played havoc with the Perfecto's target recognition systems. The AI units' weapons tracked back and forth, their perfect targeting algorithms struggling to prioritize threats that didn't fit any known combat doctrine. How do you calculate the threat level of a man charging you with a Revolutionary War musket while wearing partial plate armor? I lined up my shot carefully. We discovered that while the Perfecto's armor was nearly impenetrable, their optical sensors were relatively exposed. They had to be, to maintain combat effectiveness. And while they could track and dodge shots from modern weapons, they had no protocol for dealing with simple brass and lead bullets fired from weapons their targeting systems considered obsolete. The Springfield's report echoed through the ruins. My round, especially loaded black powder cartridge, struck the nearest Perfecto's main optical sensor. The unit staggered, its movements becoming erratic as backup systems tried to compensate. "All units, engage according to your own judgment," I ordered. "Remember, do the unexpected." What followed was perhaps the strangest battle in human military history. Soldiers wielding a mix of modern and ancient weapons attacked from all angles, following no discernible pattern. Some threw glass bottles filled with paint to blind optical sensors. Others used replica Greek fire, an ancient incendiary weapon the Perfectos had no reference for. A team of rodeo workers demonstrated that even advanced AI units could be effectively lassoed and toppled. Civil War reenactors showed that black powder smoke could blind sophisticated targeting systems just as effectively as it had human soldiers 150 years ago. "Sir," Tom's voice was excited now, "their combat efficiency is dropping. The more irregular our attacks become, the more processing errors they're showing." I watched as the Perfecto's movements became increasingly erratic. Their perfect coordination was breaking down as each unit encountered scenarios too far outside their combat parameters. They had been programmed to fight human soldiers, but what they were facing didn't fit any military doctrine ever written. The battle reached its crescendo when Private Jenkins, a former circus performer, managed to land on top of a Perfecto unit while wielding a sledgehammer and reciting Shakespeare. The AI literally froze, its processors unable to calculate an appropriate response to such an absurd threat. "They're adapting," Tom warned through the field telephone. "Combat algorithms are attempting to establish new patterns." "Good," I replied, working the bolt on my Springfield. "Time for Phase 3. Signal the ghost squads." This was the truly irrational part of our plan. We'd studied how AI systems learn. They look for patterns, even in chaos. The more we fought irrationally, the harder their systems would work to find logic in our actions, and that's exactly what we wanted. The ghost squads emerge from their hiding spots, each soldier moving in deliberately erratic patterns we developed by having children play war games. No military training, no combat logic, just pure unpredictable human movement. "Sir," Sarah's voice came over the line, "the Perfecto's processing loads are spiking. They're trying to analyze too many illogical variables at once." I lined up another shot, this time at a Perfecto that was literally spinning in circles, trying to track threats that defied its tactical programming. "Tell all units to increase chaos levels. I want every soldier to act on their worst impulses." What followed would have made any drill sergeant have a heart attack. Soldiers started skip-firing their rifles, intentionally bouncing bullets off the ground to hit the Perfectos from unexpected angles. Others began using slingshots to launch smoke grenades filled with a mixture of paint and glitter, creating sensor confusion that no AI had ever been programmed to handle. A group of rodeo clowns we'd recruited, yes, actual rodeo clowns, demonstrated that their skills at confusing angry bulls worked equally well on confused combat robots. They darted between the Perfecto's legs, their movements so erratic that the eye's targeting systems began to glitch. "Major system failures detected," Tom's voice was jubilant. "Their predictive algorithms are crashing. They can't establish baseline behavior patterns to respond to." I watched through my scope as the mighty Perfectos, the pinnacle of Kavari combat AI, began to shut down one by one. Their processors, overwhelmed by trying to find logic in pure chaos, simply couldn't maintain combat effectiveness. "Sir," Sarah called out, "we're getting reports from other sectors. The same tactic is working globally. The Perfectos, they're actually destroying themselves trying to make sense of our attacks." I allowed myself a small smile as I watched a Perfecto literally walk into a wall, its AI so overloaded with trying to predict unpredictable human behavior that it couldn't perform basic navigation. "Tom," I spoke into the field telephone, "send word to all commands. The key to fighting perfect AI is to be perfectly human irrational, unpredictable, and absolutely impossible to calculate." "Already done," he replied. "Though I don't think confuse robots with rodeo clowns is going to make it into standard military doctrine." That's exactly why it worked. I slung my rifle over my shoulder, watching as the last Perfecto in our sector collapsed, its processors burned out from trying to apply logic to inherently illogical human behavior. The Kavari built the perfect logical soldiers. They just forgot that humans have never won wars by being logical. As the dust settled over the battlefield, I couldn't help but wonder what the Kavari would try next. They'd attempted to overcome our primitive weapons with shields, tried to blind us with EMPs, and now had failed to defeat us with perfect AI soldiers. "Sir," Tom's voice was thoughtful, "what do you think they'll learn from this?" "Hopefully," I replied, watching our oddball assembly of soldiers, reenactors, and rodeo clowns celebrating their victory, "they'll learn that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons." "What is it then?" "Our ability to be completely, irrationally, impossibly human." The Kavari ultimatum arrived via a simple radio transmission, broadcast on every frequency from shortwave to commercial bands. Their message was clear: surrender all projectile weapons within 48 hours, or face extinction. I stood in our command bunker, listening to the message repeat in its mechanically translated English. Around me, the staff of our resistance headquarters continued their work, updating mechanical plotting boards and relaying messages through our network of vacuum tube radios. "Well," Tom said, looking up from his workbench where he'd been modifying ammunition, "at least they're being direct this time." "They're also desperate," I noted, studying the latest intelligence reports. "After the Perfecto disaster, they've realized they can't beat us through superior technology alone." Sarah brought over a stack of reports from our global observation network. "We're tracking massive fleet movements in orbit. Whatever they're planning, it's big." I picked up one of the report's detailed sketches of new Kavari ships entering the atmosphere, drawn by observers using old astronomical telescopes. Something about their configuration bothered me. "Tom, come look at this." I spread the drawings out on the main table. Notice anything odd about these ship designs? He studied the sketches, his engineer's mind analyzing the details. The hull configuration is different, more streamlined, and these projections along the sides. His eyes widened. They're atmospheric optimization features. Exactly. I pointed to the modified hull structures. They're designing their ships specifically for Earth's atmosphere. But why? Their previous vessels handled our atmosphere just fine. Sarah leaned in, her tactical training kicking in. Unless they're planning something that requires precise atmospheric control, something that needs their ships to operate at specific altitudes and speeds. The pieces started clicking together in my mind. Tom, remember our first engagement? What was the one thing that seemed to bother their ground troops more than anything else? The sound, he replied immediately. Their hearing is more sensitive than ours. Even with protection, the report from our rifles seemed to cause them physical discomfort. And what happens when an object breaks the sound barrier? Tom's face lit up with understanding. A sonic boom, but their ship's already. Wait. He grabbed one of the sketches. These modifications, they're not just for atmospheric optimization, they're for acoustic dampening. They're trying to protect themselves from something, Sarah added. Something loud. I picked up my old Springfield, running my hand along its wooden stock. Something like the sonic crack of a supersonic bullet? Or maybe... I paused, an idea forming. Maybe something bigger. Tom caught my train of thought. You think there's a connection between their ultimatum and their sensitivity to sound? I think, I said slowly, that we've been looking at our weapons all wrong. It's not just the kinetic impact they're afraid of, it's the sound itself. I moved to the large map table, studying the positions of our forces. After months of resistance, we'd established a significant network of mechanical artillery positions, all using primitive powder weapons that their sensors couldn't easily detect. Tom, I need you to do some calculations. Old school, no computers. I want to know what happens when we coordinate multiple sonic booms in a specific area. Not just from rifles, but from every piece of artillery we have. You want to create some kind of sonic weapon. I want to create something they won't expect. Something their acoustic dampening can't handle. I turned to Sarah. Get me every unit with operational artillery pieces. Anything that can fire a supersonic projectile. And I want them all calibrated to fire at exactly the same time. Sir, she said, already reaching for the radio. Are you suggesting we try to create some kind of massive sonic event? The Kavari gave us 48 hours to surrender our projectile weapons. I checked my watch. Let's use that time to show them exactly why these weapons are so dangerous in ways they haven't even considered. The next 48 hours were a frenzy of activity. Tom worked non-stop at his mechanical calculating machine, running numbers on sonic wave propagation and atmospheric effects. Sarah coordinated with our global network, positioning artillery units for maximum effect. The math is fascinating, Tom explained, surrounded by pages of calculations. When multiple supersonic projectiles create shock waves in close proximity, the effects compound exponentially. It's not just addition, it's multiplication. I studied the diagrams he'd drawn. And you're sure about these numbers? As sure as I can be with slide rules and mechanical calculators. But Jack. He hesitated. What we're proposing here isn't just a weapon. We're talking about manipulating atmospheric pressure on a massive scale. Show me the worst-case scenario. He pulled out a detailed chart. If we coordinate every major artillery piece we have, and I mean everything from field guns to naval rifles, we could create a sonic event unlike anything in recorded history. The pressure wave alone could shatter windows for miles. And what would it do to Kavari physiology? Based on what we know about their enhanced hearing and sensory systems, he pointed to another set of calculations. Total neural overload. Their entire command and control structure could be disrupted simultaneously. Sarah joined us, carrying fresh intelligence reports. Their fleet is moving into position. Multiple layers of ships at different altitudes. They're creating some kind of containment grid over major population centers. Preparing for their own attack, I noted. They're not just making an ultimatum, they're setting up for something big. Sir, a radio operator called out. Message from our deep space observation post. They're detecting massive energy buildups in the Kavari fleet. Whatever they're planning, it's starting. I checked the time. 36 hours into their 48-hour ultimatum. They're not going to wait. Tom, how soon can we be ready? Global coordination will take time. We need every gun crew calibrated perfectly. One mistake in timing and the whole effect could be ruined. Sir, Sarah interjected, what if that's not enough? What if the sonic weapon doesn't work? I picked up my rifle, feeling the familiar weight. Then we do what humans have always done, we adapt, we improvise, and we keep fighting. The next 12 hours were a blur of preparation. Every operational artillery piece on Earth was carefully positioned and calibrated. Gun crews drilled repeatedly, practicing loading and firing sequences with precision that would have made their Civil War predecessors proud. Tom's calculations were distributed via Morse code and manual signals, ensuring every unit knew exactly when and how to fire. We couldn't risk radio communication giving away our plans. Final positions confirmed, Sarah reported as the deadline approached. Every gun crew reports ready. We have over 3,000 artillery pieces prepared to fire simultaneously. I studied the master plot board, where small flags marked each battery position. The pattern formed a massive grid, carefully designed to create overlapping sonic waves. Time check, I ordered. 6 minutes to their deadline, Tom replied, watching his mechanical chronometer. Energy readings from their fleet are still climbing. I picked up the field telephone connected to our backup command network. All units, final confirmation. Prepare for synchronized fire on my mark. The responses came back one by one, each unit reporting ready. In bunkers, hidden positions, and fortified emplacements around the world, gun crews stood by their weapons, waiting for the signal. 1 minute, Tom announced. Above us, the Kavari ships had moved into their final positions, their hulls gleaming in the sunlight. All units, I spoke into the phone, my voice steady. Prepare to show the Kavari why humanity's weapons don't need advanced technology to change the course of a war. Fire. The single word, transmitted through our mechanical communication network, triggered what would later be called the Thunder of Earth. 3,000 artillery pieces, ranging from Civil War-era Napoleon guns to massive coastal defense rifles, fired simultaneously. The effect was beyond anything we'd calculated. The combined sonic booms created a pressure wave that was visible to the naked eye, a rippling distortion in the air that expanded outward like rings in a pond. But this was no pond, and these were no ripples. My God, Tom whispered, watching through our reinforced observation window. The Kavari ships closest to the sonic event literally staggered in the air, their carefully planned formation disrupting as the pressure wave hit them. Secondary wave incoming, Sarah announced. Tracking the effect on our mechanical sensors, we designed the firing sequence to create multiple, overlapping sonic events, each building on the last. The second wave hit just as the Kavari ships were trying to stabilize. Their acoustic dampening systems, designed to handle individual sonic booms, were overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the combined effect. Ships began dropping altitude, their crews presumably incapacitated by the sonic assault. All units, maintain fire sequence, I ordered through the field telephone. Each gun crew had been drilled to reload and fire at precise intervals, creating a continuous series of sonic events. The radio crackled with intercepted Kavari communications, their normally precise language deteriorating into chaos. Their sensitive hearing, usually an advantage, had become their greatest weakness. Energy readings from their fleet are falling, Tom reported, checking his instruments. Whatever they were planning, they can't maintain it under these conditions. I watched through my binoculars as Kavari ships began breaking formation. Some tried to gain altitude, seeking thinner air where the sonic effects would be lessened. Others descended rapidly, perhaps hoping the denser atmosphere would provide some protection. "Sir," Sarah called out urgently. "New contacts dropping from orbit, massive signatures." The Kavari reinforcements arrived just in time to meet our third synchronized barrage. These ships, not yet exposed to our tactics, flew directly into the expanding pressure waves. Their more sophisticated acoustic dampening systems actually worked against them, trying to compensate for sonic disturbances far beyond their design parameters. "They're retreating," Tom announced, his voice filled with disbelief. "The entire fleet. They're pulling back to high orbit." I keyed the field telephone one last time. "All units, execute final barrage. Let's make sure they remember this lesson." The final synchronized shot was our largest yet. Every operational gun on Earth, firing at precisely the same moment, created what one observer would later describe as the day the sky cracked. The combined sonic effect was visible from space, a massive ripple in Earth's atmosphere that sent the remaining Kavari ships scrambling for the safety of orbit. As the echo of the last shots faded, Tom turned to me. "You know what this means, don't you? They'll adapt, develop better acoustic shielding." "Let them," I replied, watching the last Kavari ship disappear into the upper atmosphere. "Every time they adapt to one of our primitive weapons, we'll show them another. That's the real lesson here." "What's that?" "That humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology, or even our ingenuity." I patted my old Springfield. "It's our stubborn refusal to accept that something won't work just because it's old." Sarah approached with fresh reports. "Sir, we're getting messages from around the world. The sonic attack, it did more than drive off their fleet. Their ground forces are in complete disarray. Their entire command structure seems to have been disrupted." "Good," I said, already thinking ahead. "Because now we know their weakness, and I've got some ideas about how to exploit it further." I turned to Tom. "How do you feel about studying ancient siege engines? I've got some thoughts about combining trebuchet principles with modern artillery." His eyes lit up with understanding. "Sometimes the old ways really are the best ways." "Exactly. And something tells me the Kavari are about to learn a lot more about human military history." The observation deck of Orbital Defense Station Alpha offered a perfect view of Earth's night side, city lights twinkling through gaps in the cloud cover. It would have been beautiful if not for the massive Kavari fleet assembling at the edge of our detection range. "They've modified their ships," Tom said, studying the enemy formation through an old-fashioned astronomical telescope. "After their defeats on Earth, we'd learned not to trust anything with modern electronics, even in space. New hull configurations. Heavily armored." I nodded, making notes in my paper logbook. The Kavari had learned from their losses in the atmosphere. Their ships now bristled with what appeared to be reinforced acoustic dampening systems and enhanced shield generators. "They think we'll try the sonic attack strategy again," Sarah observed, updating our mechanical plotting board with the fleet's positions. "They've spent months preparing for it." "Which is exactly why we won't," I replied, moving to the station's main viewport. "Tom, what's the status of Project Broadside?" He grinned, pulling out a set of technical drawings. "Ready for deployment, though I still think you're crazy for suggesting it." "Crazy is what's kept us alive so far." I studied the drawings' detailed schematics for what might be the most audacious weapons conversion in human history. "How many are operational?" 6 complete units. We've modified the old Iowa-class battleship guns just like you specified. The recoil compensation systems were the trickiest part, but we managed to adapt the original 1940s technology to work in Zergi. Sarah looked up from her plotting board. "Sir, you're not seriously suggesting we use naval artillery in space?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." I pointed to the approaching Kavari fleet. "Look at their formation. All their defensive systems are designed to counter energy weapons and modern space combat tactics. They're expecting us to fight a 23rd century battle." Instead, Tom continued, catching my drift, we're going to fight like it's 1945. Just, in space. The idea had come to me during our last engagement. The Kavari shield technology, while incredibly advanced, still operated on predictable principles. It was designed to detect and counter specific types of threats: energy weapons, guided missiles, even our sonic attacks now. But simple kinetic weapons, especially ones fired from platforms their sensors considered too primitive to be a threat, that was something their combat doctrine had never accounted for. "Sir," a lookout called from his post. "Movement in the Kavari fleet. They're beginning their approach." I moved to the command station, a purely mechanical interface we'd installed after stripping out all the modern electronics. "Signal all stations. Begin deployment of the Mark 7 units." Throughout the station, hidden panels slid open, revealing what appeared to be madness to any modern military observer. 6 16-inch 50-caliber Mark 7 naval guns, originally designed for Iowa-class battleships, now modified for space warfare. "They're going to think we've lost our minds," Sarah muttered, watching as the massive guns were positioned. "Good," I replied, checking the mechanical firing solutions Tom had calculated. "Because sometimes the best defense is to do something so crazy your enemy can't possibly prepare for it." The Kavari fleet approached with perfect military precision, their formation optimized for modern space combat. Their energy weapons powered up, shield generators humming, all of it visible through our traditional optical telescopes. "Range, 30 kilometers in closing," Tom reported, working his mechanical calculator. "They're moving exactly as predicted." I watched through the spotting scope as their lead ships began spreading out, probably preparing for a standard energy weapon bombardment. They had no reason to expect anything else after all. Conventional wisdom said projectile weapons were useless in space combat. Conventional wisdom had never met the United States Navy's Mark 7 gun. "All stations report ready," Sarah announced. "Modified shells are loaded. Recoil compensators are engaged." The shells were Tom's masterpiece, based on World War II armor-piercing rounds, but modified for vacuum operation. No electronics, no guidance systems, just precisely machined tungsten core projectiles designed to do one thing: punch very large holes in whatever they hit. "Enemy fleet entering optimal range," Tom called out. 25 kilometers. Their shields are configured for energy weapon deflection." I keyed the internal communication system, an old-style sound-powered phone network that required no electricity. "All gun crews, prepare for synchronized fire on my mark." The Kavari ships were now clearly visible through the viewport, their hulls gleaming in the reflected sunlight from Earth. Their formation was perfect, their tactics textbook. They were ready for anything a modern space battle could throw at them. They weren't ready for the U.S. Navy circa 1945. Fire. The station shuddered as all 6 Mark 7 guns fired simultaneously. In the vacuum of space, there was no thunderous report, no massive sound wave, just the silent kick of recoil as 6.2, 700-pound shells left their barrels at over 2,500 feet per second. Through the spotting scope, I watched the Kavari reaction. For precisely 1.8 seconds, nothing happened the time it took for our shells to cross the distance. Then chaos erupted. The lead ship's shields, calibrated to stop energy weapons and modern projectiles, might as well have been tissue paper. The massive armor-piercing shells, carrying the momentum of their enormous mass accelerated by traditional powder charges, simply smashed through. "Direct hits," Tom shouted, his calculator forgotten in the excitement. Their shields. They didn't even register the shots. The shells were moving too slowly by their standards. "All guns, reload," I ordered. "Adjust firing solutions for their evasive maneuvers." But the Kavari weren't making evasive maneuvers, at least, not any that made sense. Their formation had dissolved into confusion as ships tried to identify what was hitting them. Their sensors, designed to detect high-energy weapons, were blind to our simple kinetic projectiles. "Sir," Sarah reported, "they're trying to reorient their shields." Energy readings suggest they're attempting to create a broader spectrum defensive screen. Too late, I muttered, watching through the scope. All guns, second salvo, fire when ready. The second salvo caught the Kavari completely off guard. In their confusion, they'd clustered together a standard defensive formation against energy weapons that made them perfect targets for our broadside. Multiple direct hits, Tom called out, tracking impacts through his telescope. They're actually spinning out of control. The kinetic transfer in vacuum is devastating their maneuvering systems. He was right. In atmosphere, our naval guns were deadly enough. But in space, with no air resistance to bleed off energy, each hit transferred its full kinetic force directly into the target. Ships designed for the elegant dance of energy weapon combat were being knocked about like bowling pins. "Sir," Sarah's voice was urgent, "they're bringing in their heavy capital ships. 3 dreadnoughts, approaching from high orbit." The dreadnoughts were massive, each one nearly a kilometer long, bristling with energy weapons and what had to be their most advanced shield systems. Under normal circumstances, they would be nearly invincible to anything short of a concentrated fleet action. These were not normal circumstances. "Tom, do we have any of the special rounds loaded?" He grinned, pulling out a different set of calculations. 2 per gun, loaded and ready. The special rounds were another bit of historical inspiration based on the old battleship practice of firing different shell types in sequence. These particular shells were designed to fragment on impact, creating a cloud of hypervelocity shrapnel in the vacuum of space. "All guns, load special rounds," I ordered. "Target the lead dreadnought. Fire on my mark." Through the viewport, we could see the massive ships approaching, their energy weapons powering up for what they probably thought would be a decisive strike. Their shields glowed with power, ready to deflect any modern weapon we could throw at them. Fire. 12 special shells streaked across space, their trajectories pure ballistic poetry. The Kavari dreadnought's shields flared brilliantly as they tried to stop the incoming rounds and failed completely. The shells struck the massive ship's hull and detonated, breaking apart into thousands of tungsten fragments. In atmosphere, such fragments would have been slowed by air resistance. In vacuum, they maintained their full velocity, spreading out in a lethal cone that shredded anything in their path. The dreadnought's hull, designed to reflect energy weapons, offered little protection against this ancient method of destruction. "Secondary explosions detected," Tom shouted. "Their power systems are going critical." "All hands, brace for debris," I ordered through the sound-powered phones. "Prepare for counterattack." But the counterattack never came. The lead dreadnought's destruction had triggered a cascade of explosions that sent fragments scything through space, catching several smaller ships in their path. The remaining dreadnoughts, apparently unable to process what was happening, began a hasty retreat. "They're pulling back," Sarah reported, updating the plot board. "All Kavari ships are breaking orbit. They're running." I watched through the spotting scope as the mighty Kavari fleet, with all its advanced technology and sophisticated weapons, fled from what amounted to 6 World War II naval guns mounted on a space station. "Tom," I said, still tracking the retreating ships, "remind me to thank the US Navy for keeping those old guns in storage." "Already done," he replied, making notes in his logbook. "Though I don't think they ever imagined their 16-inch guns would be used for space combat." "That's the beauty of it," I said, watching the last Kavari ship disappear into deep space. The old ways work precisely because no one expects them to. In trying to perfect space warfare, the Kavari forgot the basic principles that have governed combat since the first human picked up a rock. "Sir," Sarah called out, "we're getting reports from other stations. The Kavari are withdrawing from the entire orbital defense grid." I nodded, already thinking ahead. "They'll be back. And next time, they'll have defenses against kinetic weapons." "So what do we do then?" "Simple," I replied, patting one of the massive naval guns. "We show them another piece of human military history. Tom, how do you feel about studying Greek fire?" I've got some ideas about how it might work in zero gravity. Mars wasn't meant to be a battleground. Our first permanent colony, established in the Valles Marineris, was supposed to be humanity's stepping stone to the stars. Instead, it had become our last line of defense as the Kavari fleet blockaded Earth. I stood in the colony's observation dome, watching the dust storms roll across the red plains. The thin Martian atmosphere turned the setting sun into a bloody smear on the horizon. Behind me, Tom was working on our latest adaptation of primitive technology. The pressure differential is the key, he explained, adjusting a mechanical valve system. Mars' atmosphere is less than 1% as dense as Earth's. We can use that. I turned from the viewport, studying his contraption. It looked like something from a Victorian science fiction novel: brass fittings, mechanical pressure gauges, and hand-cranked pumps. Will it work? In theory, yes. The Kavari's shield technology still operates on the same basic principles, even if they've adapted to our previous attacks. But they've never had to deal with sudden pressure changes on this scale. Sarah entered the command center, carrying our latest intelligence reports, hand-drawn maps, and mechanical sensor readings. Their ground forces are moving into position. 3 main columns, approaching from the north and east. I studied the maps. The Kavari had learned from their previous defeats, spreading their forces out to avoid concentrated attacks. Their new combat units were heavily armored, with reinforced acoustic shielding and enhanced sensor systems. How many of the pressure weapons can we deploy? I asked Tom. 6 complete units. Each one can create a localized high-pressure bubble about 50 meters in diameter. When that bubble collapses in the Martian atmosphere. He made an implosive gesture. And their shields? Won't help them. They're designed to maintain a constant pressure environment for their troops. A sudden shift from high pressure to Martian ambient, he shook his head. It'll be like deep-sea creatures being brought to the surface too quickly. I moved to our weapons rack, where my trusted Springfield hung alongside more specialized equipment. We'd modified most of our projectile weapons for Mars' lower gravity and thin atmosphere, but the basic principles remained the same. "Sir," Sarah called out, "movement at the perimeter. They're starting their advance." Through the viewport, I could see the Kavari ground forces moving across the red plains. Their combat units gleamed in the dying sunlight, kicking up clouds of Martian dust as they approached. "They think we're trapped," I noted, checking my rifle's action. "Limited supplies, nowhere to retreat to, thin atmosphere that should make our projectile weapons less effective." "Are we?" Sarah asked quietly. "Trapped, I mean?" I smiled, watching as Tom finished adjusting his pressure weapon. "Sarah, if there's one thing the Kavari still haven't learned, it's that humans are most dangerous when we're cornered. And we've got something they don't." "What's that?" 200 years of science fiction writers imagining exactly how to fight on Mars. The first Kavari assault came just after local sunset, their combat units moving with practiced precision through the Martian twilight. Their sensors, optimized for the thin atmosphere, gave them perfect visibility in the growing darkness. Too perfect, as it turned out. "Dust teams in position," Tom reported through our mechanical comm system, simple speaking tubes that ran throughout the colony. "Pressure differentials are nominal." I watched through my scope as the Kavari forces approached our first defensive line. They were being cautious, having learned from their previous encounters with our primitive weapons. Their sensors swept for power signatures, electronic emissions, anything that might indicate a threat. They found nothing, because we weren't using anything they could detect. "Execute Operation Sandstorm," I ordered. Across the Martian plain, dozens of carefully positioned charges detonated, not explosives, but simple compressed air canisters. The blast kicked up enormous clouds of red dust, far more than would be possible on Earth thanks to Mars' lower gravity. The Kavari combat units paused, their sensors trying to penetrate the artificial dust storm. That was their first mistake. "Tom, initiate pressure sequence Alpha." His modified pressure weapons activated, creating localized high-pressure bubbles within the dust clouds. The effect was immediate and devastating. As each bubble collapsed in the thin Martian atmosphere, it created a cascading series of pressure waves that played havoc with the Kavari's environmental systems. Multiple units showing signs of distress, Sarah reported, watching through our mechanical sensors. Their shield generators are trying to compensate for the pressure changes. That was exactly what we wanted. The more power they diverted to their shields, the less they had for their sensors and weapons. Second phase, I ordered, moving to my firing position. All units, execute dust protocols. Our defenders, equipped with modified projectile weapons, began firing through the dust clouds. The Kavari shields, already strained by the pressure differentials, couldn't react fast enough to stop the simple kinetic impacts. But we weren't trying to destroy them, not yet. Each hit kicked up more dust, adding to the chaos. In the thin Martian atmosphere, every impact created a much larger debris cloud than it would have on Earth. "Sir," Sarah called out, "they're trying to regroup. Formation shifting to delta pattern." I nodded, watching through my scope. The Kavari were falling back on their training, moving into a defensive formation that would have been perfect in normal conditions. "Tom, execute pressure sequence Bravo." This time, the pressure weapons created overlapping fields, turning the battlefield into a nightmare of conflicting atmospheric pressures. Kavari units caught between high and low pressure zones began to malfunction, their environmental systems unable to cope with the rapid changes. "They're splitting up," Sarah reported. "Small units trying to find clear paths through the dust." Perfect. They were doing exactly what we'd predicted, breaking into smaller groups that would be easier to isolate and eliminate. "All units, switch to Phase 3 ammunition," I ordered. These rounds were special designed specifically for Mars' unique conditions. The bullets were lighter than standard rounds, optimized for the lower gravity, but with specially designed tips that fragmented on impact, creating even more dust clouds. The battle shifted into its final phase as the Martian night fully descended. The Kavari forces, now scattered across the plain, were fighting an enemy they couldn't properly see or detect. Every movement they made kicked up more dust. Every attempt to use their advanced sensors was defeated by the simplest of particles, microscopic red Martian soil. "Third pressure wave incoming," Tom announced, monitoring his mechanical gauges, targeting their command units. I watched through my night scope an old-fashioned starlight amplifier that used no electronics as the pressure weapons created another series of devastating atmospheric effects. Kavari units caught in the pressure differentials began to literally come apart, their joints and seals failing under the extreme conditions. "Sir," Sarah called out urgently, "large energy signature detected from orbit. They're bringing in reinforcements." Through the viewport, we could see new Kavari ships descending through the thin Martian atmosphere. They were different from anything we'd seen before, probably designed specifically to counter our pressure tactics. "Tom, how many charges do we have left?" He checked his inventory. 4 complete sets. Enough for one major operation. I studied the approaching ships through my scope. They were maintaining a higher altitude than previous attacks, probably trying to stay above our effective range. "Sarah, get me a wind reading." She consulted our mechanical weather station. Local dust storm approaching from the northwest. Wind speeds increasing. A smile spread across my face. "Perfect. Tom, reconfigure the pressure weapons for maximum vertical effect." "Sarah, signal all units to fall back to secondary positions." "Sir?" Tom looked confused. "We're retreating." "No," I replied, watching the dust storm approach. "We're about to remind the Kavari why Mars has been killing human technology for 50 years. The plan was audacious, possibly insane, but those were the kinds of plans that had kept humanity in the fight so far. As our forces pulled back, the Kavari probably thought they had us on the run. Their new ships began their landing approach, preparing to deploy what had to be their latest generation of combat units. That's when we triggered all our remaining pressure charges simultaneously. The effect was beyond even our calculations. The sudden pressure waves, combined with the approaching dust storm and Mars' low gravity, created something unprecedented, a massive vertical dust devil that reached nearly a kilometer into the sky. The Kavari ships, caught in this artificial atmospheric phenomenon, suddenly found themselves trying to operate in conditions their computers had no reference for. Their shields, designed to handle energy weapons and kinetic impacts, were useless against the swirling maelstrom of red dust that invaded every joint and seal. "Energy signatures failing," Sarah reported, watching through our mechanical sensors. "Their ships are losing power." "Now," I ordered into the comm tube, "all units, execute final protocol." Across the battlefield, our remaining forces opened fire with modified artillery pieces, old-style powder guns that we'd adapted for Martian conditions. The shells were special, designed to burst at specific altitudes and release clouds of fine metallic powder into the dust storm. The result was catastrophic for the Kavari. Their ships, already struggling with the dust, now had to deal with highly conductive particles being sucked into their engines and power systems. One by one, they began falling from the sky. "Multiple impacts detected," Tom called out. "The dust storm it's actually getting stronger." He was right. We'd created a self-sustaining phenomenon. The heat from the falling ships, combined with our pressure differentials and Mars' unique atmospheric conditions, had triggered a genuine Martian dust storm, one that would continue long after our charges were depleted. I watched through my scope as the mighty Kavari attack force was reduced to scattered groups of malfunctioning units, their advanced technology defeated by nothing more complex than dust and wind. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "we're getting reports from orbit. The Kavari fleet is pulling back. All ships are retreating to safe distance." "They'll be back," Tom added, already working on modifications to his pressure weapons. "They always come back." "Let them," I replied, watching the dust storm rage across the Martian plain. "Because next time, we'll show them something even more primitive." I turned to Tom with a grin. "How much do you know about ancient Roman siege tactics?" The final Kavari armada arrived exactly as our long-range telescopes had predicted. 5,000 ships, including designs we'd never seen before, emerged from hyperspace just beyond lunar orbit. This was their last, overwhelming push to end the war. I stood in our new command center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, studying the mechanical plotting board that tracked their approach. Around me, the combined forces of Earth's resistance worked at stations that would have looked more at home in World War II than in a modern military facility. "Their new ships are different," Tom said, examining the telescope images. "Look at the hull configurations, complete redesign of their shield generators." Sarah brought over the latest intelligence analysis. "They're claiming these vessels are primitive proof, specifically designed to counter every tactic we've used against them." I nodded, noting the massive size of their capital ships. "They've had time to adapt, studied every engagement, every trick we've used. These ships are probably immune to sonic attacks, pressure differentials, kinetic impacts. So everything we've done before won't work," Tom finished. "They've finally figured out how to stop our primitive weapons." "No," I replied, moving to our central planning table. "They've figured out how to stop our previous primitive weapons. But humanity's been fighting wars for a lot longer than they realize." I spread out a series of old technical manuals, some dating back to ancient times, others from more recent conflicts. Each one represented a different era of human warfare, a different approach to solving the eternal problem of defeating a superior force. "Tom, what's the one thing all our successful tactics had in common?" He thought for a moment. "Simplicity? Using basic physical principles they didn't expect?" "Close. It's that we never used the same trick twice. Every time they adapted to one of our weapons, we went further back in history and found something even more primitive." I pointed to the approaching fleet. "They think they've finally caught up, that they've developed countermeasures for everything we might try." "Haven't they?" Sarah asked, studying the fleet formations. "Those ships look pretty impervious to anything we've got left." I smiled, pulling out a very old book, a treatise on ancient Greek warfare. That's because we haven't shown them our oldest tricks yet. Tom, how's Project Archimedes coming along? His eyes lit up. The solar reflectors? Ready for deployment. Though I still think it's insane trying to recreate an ancient Greek weapon in space. Sometimes the oldest solutions are the best ones. I turned to Sarah. Status of Operation Trojan. She nodded, understanding dawning on her face. All units in position. The Cavalry won't be able to detect them until it's too late. Good. I checked our chronometer, an old mechanical clock that needed winding every day. Because we're about to remind the Cavalry why humanity's most primitive weapons have survived for thousands of years. Through our reinforced viewport, we could see the first ships entering Earth's atmosphere, their hulls gleaming with confidence. They thought they'd finally solved the puzzle of human warfare. They were about to learn that some puzzles don't have solutions, they just have more layers of complexity. The Cavalry fleet descended in perfect formation, their new ships arranged in a defensive pattern that would have countered every tactic we'd previously used. Their shield generators pulsed with energy, ready to deflect sonic attacks. Their hulls were reinforced against kinetic impacts. Their environmental systems were hardened against pressure differentials. They were prepared for everything, except what we actually had planned. All stations report ready, Sarah announced, updating our mechanical plotting board. Operation Trojan is in position. I nodded, watching through our optical telescopes as the Cavalry began their final approach. Tom, status of the Archimedes arrays. All reflectors aligned, waiting for optimal solar angle. He worked his mechanical calculator, checking figures. Though I still can't believe we're actually trying this. The Archimedes arrays were our most ambitious project, yet massive arrays of polished bronze mirrors, positioned in low Earth orbit. The design was based on legends of Archimedes using similar mirrors to burn enemy ships at Syracuse over 2,000 years ago. Sir, Sarah called out, they're beginning their deployment. Multiple landing craft detected. Through the telescopes, we could see smaller vessels separating from the main fleet, probably carrying their ground forces. Their confidence was obvious in how they moved, making no attempt to conceal their approach vectors. Initiate Phase 1, I ordered. Signal the Trojan units. Across the globe, hidden positions that had been prepared months in advance suddenly activated. But these weren't modern military installations, they were something far more primitive and far more dangerous. The first Cavalry landing craft never knew what hit them. As they descended through the cloud layer, they encountered something their sensors couldn't properly process: hundreds of simple balloons, each carrying a payload of fine metallic powder. Multiple impacts reported, Sarah announced. The powder is having the expected effect on their engines. It was beautiful in its simplicity. The powder, a mixture of metal particles and chemical catalysts, was being drawn into their propulsion systems. Once inside, it reacted with their power plants, causing cascading failures. Tom, the fleet is responding. Are the arrays in position? He checked his calculations one final time. Ready on your mark, though I still think this is impossible. That's exactly why it's going to work. I watched as the Cavalry capital ships moved to support their failing landing craft. Execute Archimedes protocol. Across our orbital network, hundreds of bronze mirrors suddenly aligned, focusing reflected sunlight onto specific points of the Cavalry fleet. The effect wasn't immediate, this wasn't science fiction. But as the concentrated solar energy began to build, temperature spikes detected, Tom called out excitedly. Their shields are trying to compensate, but they're not designed for this kind of focused thermal attack. He was right. The Cavalry had built their defenses to handle energy weapons, kinetic impacts, and sonic attacks. But simple reflected sunlight, concentrated by primitive mirrors, it was too basic for their sophisticated systems to properly counter. Sir, Sarah's voice was urgent. They're launching countermeasures, some kind of energy dispersion field. Perfect, I replied, watching through the telescope. Signal Phase 3 units. Time to show them why humans started using fire as a weapon. As the Kavari fleet struggled with our orbital mirrors, we launched the next phase of our attack. From hidden positions around the globe, we deployed our most primitive weapon, yet modified Greek fire, an ancient incendiary weapon whose exact composition had been lost to history. Until now. Greek fire launchers report ready, Tom announced. Though I still can't believe we recreated a Byzantine weapon for space combat. The launchers were simple mechanical devices, using compressed air to propel streams of our modified Greek fire into the sky. The formula, which we'd spent months perfecting, had been adapted for use in both atmosphere and vacuum. Multiple hits confirmed, Sarah reported. The Greek fire it's adhering to their hulls, their shields aren't stopping it. That was the beauty of it. The Kavari had developed defenses against every modern weapon we'd used, but they had no protocols for dealing with a liquid fire that stuck to surfaces and continued burning even in space. Execute final phase, I ordered. All units, implement Thunder Protocol. This was our masterstroke, the culmination of everything we'd learned about fighting the Kavari. As their ships dealt with the Greek fire and the concentrated solar attacks, we launched our final surprise. From hidden silos across Earth, we launched thousands of simple projectiles. Not missiles, not smart weapons, just solid metal rods, accelerated by primitive chemical rockets. The kind of weapon that had been theorized since the 1950s, but never implemented because it seemed too simple. Kinetic impacts in 3, 2, 1. The rods struck with devastating force. The Kavari's new shields, already strained by the Greek fire and solar attacks, couldn't handle the simple physics of mass times velocity. Their mighty fleet, designed to resist every modern weapon, was being torn apart by technology that would have been familiar to ancient warriors. Multiple capital ships breaking formation, Sarah called out. Their defensive line is collapsing. Through the telescope, I watched as our three-pronged attack overwhelmed their defenses. Ships burning with Greek fire tried to maneuver, only to be struck by kinetic rods or caught in the focused sunlight of our mirror arrays. Sir, Tom reported, we're picking up massive energy fluctuations in their fleet. They're trying to retreat. But retreat wasn't as simple as they'd hoped. The Greek fire continued to burn, affecting their hyperspace drives. The kinetic impacts had disrupted their formation, making coordinated movement impossible, and our mirror arrays kept them pinned under concentrated solar energy. Send the final message, I ordered. Sarah nodded, moving to our mechanical transmitter. In simple Morse code, we sent the Kavari our terms: immediate withdrawal from Earth space, recognition of human sovereignty, and a permanent peace treaty. Their response came quickly, also in Morse code, suggesting their more advanced communication systems had been damaged. They accepted. As their burning fleet limped away from Earth, Tom turned to me. You know what this means? We've won. Actually won. I nodded, watching through the telescope as the last Kavari ships disappeared into hyperspace. We won because they never understood what they were really fighting. What do you mean? They thought they were fighting a technological war, I explained, closing the ancient military treatise on my desk. But they were really fighting every war humanity has ever fought. Every technique we've developed, every lesson we've learned, every primitive solution we've discovered. It was all still there, waiting to be used. Sarah approached with the final battle reports. Sir, what do we do now? They'll eventually develop counters to these weapons too. I smiled, picking up an even older book from my desk. Then we'll go back further. Did you know the ancient Chinese had some fascinating theories about chemical warfare? And I've been reading about some interesting Roman siege techniques. Tom groaned. You're already planning for the next war, aren't you? No, I replied, watching Earth's sunset through our viewport. I'm remembering the old ones. Because that's humanity's real strength. We don't just learn from history, we keep it ready to use again. 1 year after the Kavari War, I stood in the newly established Earth Defense Academy, facing a room full of cadets. Behind me, displayed on the wall, were the weapons that had helped save humanity. The Springfield rifle, Tom's modified pressure weapons, diagrams of the Archimedes arrays, and dozens of other primitive devices. The Kavari War taught us many things, I began, running my hand along the worn wood of my trusted Springfield. But perhaps the most important lesson was one humanity had forgotten until we were forced to remember it. Tom, now the Academy's head of weapons development, sat in the back of the classroom, probably already sketching new modifications to ancient weapons. Sarah, recently promoted to colonel, stood by the door, adding notes to our ever-growing tactical manual. You see, I continued, humanity didn't survive because we were more advanced, or stronger, or even more innovative. We survived because we remembered. Every weapon, every tactic, every crazy idea that worked in the past, we kept them all. I picked up one of the training manuals we'd developed, a unique combination of ancient military treatises and modern combat doctrine. The Kavari made a fundamental mistake. They assumed that newer always meant better, that advanced technology would always trump simple solutions. They forgot something that humanity has known since we first picked up stones as weapons. Moving to the classroom's window, I gestured at the rebuilt cities beyond. The old ways work. They work because they're based on fundamental principles that don't change. Physics doesn't care about technology. Gravity doesn't check if you're using a computer. And a simple rock, thrown hard enough, can still change the course of history. I turned back to the cadets, seeing the understanding in their eyes. That's why this academy teaches everything from the most advanced space combat techniques to the most basic Stone Age weapons. Because you never know which piece of human history might save humanity's future. Tom stood up, adding his perspective. We've already received reports of other alien civilizations studying our methods. They call us the primitives who won. They don't understand that what they see as primitive, we see as proven. And that, Sarah concluded, is our greatest advantage. We don't just have a military history, we have all of military history, ready to use at any moment. I picked up my rifle one last time, feeling the familiar weight. Remember this, cadets. The next war won't be won by who has the most advanced technology. It'll be won by those who best understand that sometimes the oldest solution is still the best solution. Looking out at their eager faces, I could see the future of Earth's defense forces. They wouldn't just be soldiers, they would be custodians of humanity's entire military heritage, ready to use any weapon, any tactic, from any era of human history. Because that's what the Kavari never understood, and what we must never forget, humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology. It's our memory.